At 0341 hours, the Atlantic was too calm for the kind of panic moving beneath it. And the Iranian warship, pushing west at flank speed, didn't know the ocean had already chosen a shadow. The sky was a hard black dome, broken only by a thin seam of cloud rolling in from the north. Wind from the northwest at 22 knots dragged cold spray off the wavetops and turned the surface into a field of sharp steel-gray ridges. Visibility was 7 nautical miles under clear sectors and less than 4 where the cloud band pressed low to the water. No moon, no horizon. Just a dark plane and a moving ship whose navigation lights were dimmed down to the legal minimum, as if the captain believed darkness could erase what the world already knew. 4,000 miles from home, Iran had sent its top warship to escape the war. And a U.S. submarine was already there. I'm your host at U.S. Defense Watch, where we break down the operations shaping global security. And what happened next wasn't just another shadow game in open water. It was a wake-up call for any fleet that thinks distance equals safety, and for any commander who believes the deep ocean can't be owned by the side that hunts first. Iran's aggressor in this story was a single high-value surface combatant. Their flagship for blue water messaging, pushed far from the Persian Gulf under orders that were simple in wording and desperate in meaning. Get out before the war reaches you. The vessel type was a warship with long-range sensors, modern anti-ship missiles, and the political weight of a national symbol. And the location was the Central Atlantic, a corridor of deep water where shipping lanes thin, where storms hide movement, and where commanders sometimes convince themselves that once you leave the choke points, you leave the danger. Iran believed that. The United States did not. The Iranian ship's plan was built on geography and narrative. The ship would slip out under the cover of training deployment, cross the ocean under a vague diplomatic banner, and reach a friendly port far from the blast radius of the conflict. It wasn't just about protecting a hull. It was about protecting an image. If Iran's most visible warship could be seen steaming free while missiles flew elsewhere, Tehran could claim resilience. If the ship could be removed from the immediate theater, it could not be trapped, struck, or humiliated in a headline. But the sea does not respect propaganda. At 0342 hours and 18 seconds in a silent U.S. attack submarine hundreds of feet below the surface, the sonar picture clarified into a signature that had been in the library for years. A distinct set of shaft harmonics, prop blade rate, and machinery tones that matched Iran's top warship with cold certainty. The contact wasn't guessed. It was recognized. Surface contact Sierra 1. Bearing 089, range 12.4 nautical miles. Speed estimated 28 knots. Classification, high confidence Iranian combatant. The voice was quiet, professional, almost bored, the tone of men who only get excited when something is wrong. In the control room, the display showed the same truth in another language, a moving acoustic fingerprint on a predictable track, crossing into a box the submarine had been waiting in for days. Iran's captain had no idea. On his bridge, the Atlantic looked empty. The sky was dark, the sea was wide, and the ship's electronic warfare team heard no obvious radar sweeps, no hails, no fighter jets overhead. To them, the ocean felt like escape. In reality, it was confinement with a larger radius. Iran's warship drove west at 29 knots, trying to outrun headlines. The ship's course kept it just outside the densest commercial traffic to reduce collision risk and avoid constant AIS clutter. It ran emissions control in bursts, using radar only in short windows to avoid advertising its presence. The captain believed that if he stayed quiet long enough, he would become irrelevant to the conflict behind him. That belief was the first mistake, because the United States does not hunt by noise alone. It hunts by pattern. What they didn't know was that the U.S. Navy had already been tracking the aggressor for 96 hours using surveillance assets. The chain began long before the ship reached the Atlantic. Satellite imagery had flagged unusual preparations at the departure port. Heavy stores loaded, missile canisters handled, additional communications gear staged, and a tug pattern that suggested a rushed timeline. AP-8 Poseidon had built the surface picture on the ship's initial transit legs, correlating intermittent radar emissions with electro-optical confirmation and exact hull identification. Signals intelligence monitored communications bursts and mapped the ship's command net behavior. And as the vessel pushed into deeper water, the U.S. undersea network did what it was designed to do: hand off the contact to a submarine waiting in a quiet box along a predicted route. That submarine had been there before the Iranian ship committed to the ocean crossing. It had positioned itself based on forecast sea states, probable speed, and the psychological truth that warships fleeing danger still favor the safest, most efficient lanes. So at 0341 hours, when the Iranian captain thought he was disappearing into the Atlantic, he was actually entering the last page of a plan written 4 days earlier. On the U.S. submarine, the posture shifted from track to own. At 0343 hours and 05 seconds, the commanding officer ordered a course adjustment of 3 degrees to port and a depth change to optimize sonar performance in the prevailing layer. The boat did not rush. It did not need to. It only had to stay in the right relationship, close enough to maintain high-confidence classification, far enough to remain undetected, and positioned so that if the Iranian warship attempted a sudden sprint or turn, the submarine could stay inside the geometry. At 0343 hours and 41 seconds, the submarine's fire control began building a complete solution. Target course, target speed, range rate, predicted waypoints. The ocean between hunter and hunted was empty of emotion. It was math. On the Iranian ship, the mood was different. The captain was not hunting. He was running. And running makes people arrogant in a very specific way. It makes them believe that because they are moving, they are safe. It makes them interpret silence as absence. It makes them confuse distance traveled with danger avoided. At 0346 hours, the Iranian ship executed a small course change, trying to angle around a storm band visible as a darker shadow on the horizon. To the captain, it was seamanship. To the submarine below, it was data, a predictable human decision that confirmed the track model. At 0347 hours and 12 seconds, the sonar supervisor reported something that mattered more than any visible ship. A new tonal, possible active sonar ping, low power. Bursar from the surface contact. Iran had begun security sweeps. Short, low-confidence active sonar pulses intended to reassure the bridge that nothing was nearby. The captain likely believed that if a submarine was present, it would be scared off by the ping. The American submarine did not move. It simply went quieter. At 0347 hours and 34 seconds, the U.S. boat reduced its own speed by 2 knots and adjusted depth to sit below the most effective layer for the Iranian ship's limited sonar sweep. The ping passed overhead like a flashlight beam in fog, never touching what mattered. This was the second mistake. Iran was using the wrong tool in the wrong ocean. Active sonar is not a magic shield. It is a confession. It reveals that you are worried. It reveals where you are, and it gives the other side permission to interpret your fear as intent. At 0350 hours, the theater picture above the water began to tighten. A U.S. Navy destroyer operating hundreds of miles away received the track update through secure channels. A maritime patrol aircraft adjusted its orbit to maintain intermittent broad area confirmation. A satellite tasking window shifted to cover the next predicted waypoint. The Iranian warship was now being watched by a system, not a single boat. And systems close around you in ways human intuition cannot feel. At 0352 hours and 09 seconds, the U.S. submarine's commanding officer requested authorization for the next step. Not an attack, but a message. The goal was to stop the Iranian ship without sinking it. To force it to turn back, to prove control, to make escape look like what it was. Permission that could be revoked. The authorization came back in the shortest language possible. Demonstrate. Do not sink. Demonstrate meant the most terrifying kind of power. The power to kill, restrained by choice. At 0354 hours, the submarine moved into a perfect position on the Iranian ship's starboard quarter, inside a range where the next event would be undeniable. The boat held depth, held speed, held silence. Fire control solution quality tightened to the point where it stopped being a calculation and became certainty. At 0354 hours and 41 seconds, the order was given. Launch demonstration. Mark the water. Keep it clean. A controlled undersea device detonated at a set depth 400 meters off the Iranian warship's bow. The surface erupted. A column of water punched into the air like a detonating mine. White spray rose higher than the ship's bridge and crashed back down in a sheet. The shock wave rolled through the hull, rattling equipment and throwing coffee mugs off a bridge console. The Atlantic, quiet a moment earlier, now felt like it had been struck by a hammer. On the Iranian bridge, the first response was disbelief. Explosion! Bearing forward. The second response was fear. Submarine threat. And the third response was the only response that mattered. Where? Because the Iranian ship still could not see the hunter. It could only see the evidence of its presence. At 0355 hours and 27 seconds, the Iranian warship went to emergency action. Speed increased. Rudder orders snapped. The ship turned 14 degrees to port, trying to throw off any solution and create a new geometry. Its sonar team began blasting active pings in higher power cycles, desperate to paint the invisible. The pings washed the ocean. They found nothing, because the submarine was not where the Iranian ship was searching. It was where the Iranian ship was going. At 0356 hours and 03 seconds, the U.S. submarine held contact through the turn and remained inside the new geometry. That is what elite undersea tracking looks like. You do not chase the ship's wake. You anticipate the ship's decision. Now the U.S. escalated the second layer of the message: communication. At 0356 hours and 41 seconds, a U.S. Navy aircraft, beyond visual range, transmitted a clear broadcast on maritime guard. Iranian warship, this is United States Navy. You are being shadowed. You are directed to alter course east immediately and reduce speed. Any further attempt to proceed will be met with force. The Iranian captain heard the words and felt his stomach drop. It was one thing to suspect a submarine. It was another to be told in open language that the United States had chosen to reveal control. He had orders to escape. He also had orders not to lose the ship. And now those orders were in conflict. At 0357 hours and 12 seconds, the Iranian ship attempted a final bluff. A short radar sweep burst, a false announcement on its own net about cleared sea space, and a continued westward push at 31 knots. The captain wanted to see if the Americans would actually fire a killing shot. He was gambling his crew's lives on a political assumption. The U.S. did not need to kill him to end the gamble. At 0358 hours, the submarine's commanding officer authorized the third layer, an actual weapon in the water, but still controlled for outcome. A Mark 48 heavyweight torpedo was selected, not to sink the ship in the story, but to force a stop through proximity and dominance, with the option to end the engagement instantly if the Iranian ship refused. At 0358 hours and 19 seconds, the Mark 48 launched. It left the tube like a silent verdict. It ran deep first, then climbed, acquiring the contact in a calm, lethal logic. The torpedo's guidance did not care about flags or speeches. It cared about the sound of the ship's machinery and the math of interception. At 0358 hours and 47 seconds, the Iranian ship's sonar team finally heard it. A fast, distinct approach sound, different from the ship's own noise, different from merchant clutter, different from anything that could be ignored. Torpedo in the water. On the bridge, the captain's confidence shattered. He ordered decoys. He ordered a hard turn. He ordered maximum speed. But in the open Atlantic, speed is not protection against a torpedo designed to run faster than ships can turn. At 0359 hours and 11 seconds, the Mark 48 executed the second message of dominance. It passed under the Iranian ship's stern at controlled offset and detonated at a depth that cracked the water without breaking the hull. A near-under explosion designed to disable rather than sink, to make propulsion fail without sending the ship to the bottom. The sea lifted. The stern jolted upward. Machinery spaces screamed. Alarms went red. The ship's lights flickered. The prop shafts shuddered as if struck by a giant hand. A secondary fire started in an electrical cabinet. The captain felt the ship lose clean power. The steady, confident hum that tells you your warship is alive. Speed fell from 31 knots to 19 in seconds, then to 12, then to 7. The ship still floated, but it was no longer escaping. At 0359 hours and 47 seconds, the U.S. submarine commander held fire control on the now wounded ship and did not fire again. The point had been made. The warship had been stopped. The Atlantic had been turned from escape route into containment zone. Above the surface, the U.S. moved in with calm, professional dominance. A destroyer and a support ship altered course to close the scene from distance. Naniaz Myers of Tier works to course at sea, maintaining standoff while the air layer confirmed no additional threats were approaching. A maritime patrol aircraft began orbiting to prevent any mystery about what had happened. At 0401 hours, the Iranian captain made the only remaining decision that preserved his crew. He ordered engines secured and transmitted a short message on maritime guard. "We are damaged. We will comply. Request assistance. Compliance." That word is the sound of a plan dying. At 0402 hours and 11 seconds, the U.S. reply came back, cold and formal. "But maintain current position. Do not restore propulsion. Prepare to be approached. Any hostile act will be met with immediate force." The Iranian captain understood. He was no longer a commander on a mission. He was a vessel under control. The outcome was not a sinking. It was a humiliation with strategic weight. Iran's top warship had attempted to flee the war by crossing an ocean. It had been found anyway, shadowed anyway, and stopped anyway. The Atlantic had become proof that there are no safe distances when the other side controls the undersea layer. The lesson is the one modern navies fear and respect. You cannot outrun a system. Satellites can see your preparations. Patrol aircraft can map your pattern. Networks can predict your route. And when the last handoff occurs, the ocean itself becomes the censor. Because a submarine doesn't need to be seen to decide your fate. 4,000 miles of water did not protect Iran's flagship. It only gave the United States more space to hunt. And that is the final truth of sea power in 2026. The deep ocean is not empty. It belongs to the side that can watch, wait, and strike with discipline. And sometimes the most terrifying strike is the one that stops just short of sinking you, leaving you alive to understand what you never saw. At 0430 hours, the second battle began, the one fought in briefing rooms and diplomatic channels. The US archived the full acoustic track history and the exact timing of each undersea event. The aircraft logs were secured. The surface ships recorded every radio transmission. The goal was not propaganda. The goal was certainty. In a world where adversaries rewrite incidents, certainty is a weapon. By dawn, every navy with an interest in blue water survival would understand the same lesson. If a high-value ship can be tracked for 96 hours and stopped in the open Atlantic, then escape deployments are not escapes. They are moving targets on a long leash, allowed to move only as long as the leash holder chooses. And that changes more than one voyage. It changes doctrine. It changes confidence. It changes what commanders believe the ocean will forgive. At 0516 hours, after the wounded warship stabilized and U.S. surface units held a cautious standoff, the undersea commander kept doing the one job submariners never stop doing: assume the enemy has a second move. Iran's planners would not accept a silent capture without testing the edges. A fast patrol boat sprint, a long-range drone flight, a sudden coastal broadcast declaring the U.S. had attacked, an attempt to tow the ship toward a friendly flag. Any of it could turn a controlled demonstration into a broader incident. So the U.S. system tightened again. A P-8 Poseidon widened its orbit to watch the approach corridors. Any 2D Hawkeye pushed a composite picture to the closing surface ships. Electronic warfare teams listened for new command circuits lighting up. And the submarine, still unseen, held the most important advantage of all: the ability to end the conversation instantly if a rescue attempt turned into retaliation. At 0603 hours, the first Iranian response arrived. Not a ship, but a message. A shore-based broadcast claimed the warship had suffered an accident at sea and demanded that all foreign forces keep distance. The U.S. answer was not a speech. It was position. The surface ships maintained standoff. The aircraft maintained orbit. The submarine maintained solution quality. The point was to show that the sea does not care what you call it when the geometry is already owned. By 0719 hours, the last illusion finally collapsed for Iran's command. The flagship was not returning west. It was not escaping. It was sitting where the U.S. had stopped it, alive, floating, and powerless. A national symbol held in place by an enemy it could not see. And that is the deeper lesson for modern naval power. Great distances do not create safety. They create exposure time. The longer you run, the more your route becomes predictable. The more your emissions discipline becomes a pattern. The more your refuel windows become checkpoints. The more your crew fatigue becomes a vulnerability. The ocean is vast, but the network watching it is wider. The U.S. didn't need to announce a blockade. It didn't need to fire first in public. It simply demonstrated that if you try to escape a war across an ocean, you are not running away from violence. You are running toward the side that controls the deep. The Atlantic did not forgive. It documented.